So I was going to say good morning. I think it is still good morning, right? I can't
It
even
is
tell.
on the cusp of morning and afternoon, yes.
On the cusp. And where are you? You have the most beautiful background. I wish I was outside now. Where are you right now?
We're up in the Catskills above the city.
Oh,
We have a
beautiful.
cabin here that we've been surviving in for the last year, and we got it in like the 80s. It was
Nice.
just an old hunter's cabin, and it's this beautiful 5 acres in the Catskill Mountains. But we're way up in the mountains.
Way up. Oh,
So
beautiful.
when
Well,
something goes wrong,
I'm just below you, south of you in Brewster. I don't know if you know Brewster, New
Oh,
York.
yeah.
oh wow,
Yeah.
You're south and east. We're
And
in
east.
Western Catskills. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, Brewster's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Oh,
I
so
think
it's been a
it's
lifesaver.
Yeah.
So I am in the woods also, but outside my window. But we're so thrilled to just have a chat this morning. Nothing formal. Leon and his class have been studying the last gasp and have had a wonderful opportunity to sit with it and be with it. And of course, it's something that I have done the same with because of the connection to our 100 Years, 100 Women project, which
Yes.
it's just been the joy that just keeps on giving this year. This has been such a year, and I'd love to I know you've been through a lot this year as well, and maybe just start with like, how are you? That kind of existential question, right? How are you, and where do you find yourself right now, sort of, in this incredible moment and through your creative journey and your personal journey over this past year? How are you actually?
well, I'm really good. I'll speak for myself. I feel like it's given me the isolation that I needed and I wanted, and I haven't lived through a lot of tragedy. I mean, my family all had COVID, but they're all okay now. I mean, so I feel really well, and I feel like it's really came at a good time to change things. And at this moment, I'm resisting the fast pace of everyone wanting to suddenly get back to work and suddenly become all fabulous again, and I'm just resisting that. So I'm not going to do that. So
I'm in a funny place, I think. I was in a really good productive space in the early pandemic, and that's when we made the film Last Gasp. And and I agree with Peggy. It gave me a chance to stop because I was in the middle of teaching and middle of a lot of different projects. So it just gave me that chance to be local, and that's one of the words we've been using a lot. We've enjoyed being local and everything that means. And now that we're moving out, I'm in conflict about it. I think I feel uneasy. I think it spoke to my closet introvert, and now that introvert is sort of having to get her outfits together to go back out in the world.
Right.
And I'm sort of not wanting to go, and at the same time starting to have that FOMO, having a little bit of a fear of missing out because everybody else is starting to do things. So I'm in a kind of a little bit more of a wobbly place than I think I've been the whole time. I'm excited about what might happen, but at the same time, I feel like I don't know what that is.
Yeah,
I
it's so true. No, go ahead, Peggy.
no, I just think the pandemic and all its horror gave uh, theater and art, performance and everything the room that it needed to start looking at what everyone's doing and why are you doing it, and look at the world we live in and what are we going to do about it. And it gave everyone time to digest all this incredible, to me, all the history and all the things that are happening. Like just now, I heard in the radio that they just found 600 more Native American bodies under a school. It's like this getting rid of Trump was the beginning of a really interesting period. I feel like, and I feel like the pandemic and all its horror gave us time to digest what's really been going on when everything's not in such a hurry.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so nice not to be in a hurry. So nice. So talk a little bit about those early days of the pandemic. You were stuck in the UK, right? You were stuck in the UK. And how did this this piece evolve, as you're talking about thinking differently about theater, your own practice? And I know you were in the middle of the project anyway, right? It was kind of already happening for a live situation. How did you evolve into this amazing film?
Well, as you say, we were already rehearsing. I teach it in London a half a year every year. So I was in my teaching flow, and Peggy had come over and we were rehearsing to do the show at La Mama actually in April. And in the midst of intense rehearsals, and the lockdown was starting to creep up on us. And what happened was Peggy was living across town from where I was living. And it became clear that if the lockdown and when the lockdown happened, we wouldn't be able to see each other. And we weren't so sure that Peggy should come back to New York at that point because New York was in such a bad state. So we didn't know what to do. And I was renting a room, which I normally do for my teaching job, from some friends. So they got busy and started asking around if there was some place for Peggy to live or us to live together nearby a rehearsal studio so we could carry on working. Because I think we all thought maybe it wasn't going to last long, or we didn't know. And, and even La Mama and the Barbican, where we were also planning to do it, hadn't absolutely canceled at that point, but it looked like it might happen. So my flatmate found this neighbor who had this house that they had bought, but because of the lockdown and Brexit and loads of other things, were not able to start working on it. It was absolutely empty. It hadn't been touched for 50 years. The woman who had lived there for 50 years and moved out, but she had died and her family moved them out. And so they moved us in. We had nothing in this house but us. And we started to accumulate the things we needed. But the minute we walked in that house, we thought, we need to do something in this house. It's got so much resonance and so many memories, so much beautiful light and architectural features. But we're not those kinds of artists, really. So we just decided, okay, we've got to continue working on the show. And the only way we can do that is possibly rehearsing on Zoom with our production manager / designer. Let's just use the Zoom as a rehearsal room. We'll construct each scene, because we still had some dramaturgy and just construction to do. We'll construct each scene for the Zoom camera as a way of rehearsing, as a methodology for finishing the show. And as we began to do it, we began to really love it. I loved the control that we had on being able to manage the image. And for me as a director, I loved being able to be in it and also see it, because I don't often do that. I'm directing from within. And after we did about 3 scenes, because we decided to just plod through chronologically into the show, we thought, oh, this might be something. And then we started to construct it a little more consciously as something that might be consumed as a series of short vignettes or as the piece itself. And that's pretty much how that came about.
And everything was empty. So all the rooms were empty. So we just we'd spend the day deciding where the light was coming in the best in the house. We'd move from the front to the back or whatever, because we had no lights, of course. And we just moved through the house like bandits or something. I mean, it had no refrigerator. We eventually got a refrigerator and had food and stuff. We didn't even have a bed. We had no bed. It was great.
We had friends who, provided those things ultimately. And also I had storage from all of our other shows, Unexploded Ordinances and some of the other projects. So we had loads of tables, because I love tables, and I talk about that in the piece. But so we had all of these sort of plastic folding tables and all of these rocking chairs and folding chairs that we had from our sets. So we just brought those in and turned those into our house furniture. And they, as you see, appeared in the film.
Yeah, the house was such a beautiful character in your film. I love that so much. And I grew up in an old house, and I was flooded with memories of those secret little passageways and sort of the crumbling wallpaper and the different doors and the different views of the doors. That was extraordinary. So say a little bit more about the content of the piece. How did that evolve and respond to your circumstance, to the space, to the lack of resources but your own resourcefulness, did the content shift as you were going day by day, or was it very much a filtering, a combination of all the things that you'd already been working on?
Well, when we started working on this piece, we had decided we'd do 2 solo shows. Peggy wanted to do a solo show of 3 monologues called The Trump in Me, because she started to respond to the ways in which she saw herself reflected in this behavior and trying to rationalize that. And also a monologue called Lucky Fucker, because that's as we tell that story in the show. And then a story about these 3 all these Johnnies that she encountered, and talk about race, to try to talk about it from white person's point of view. And so that was already in flow. I wanted to make a piece about knowledge and know-how, and was quite attracted to the idea of maybe making small essays around knowledge and the whole know-how, phenomena, how-to phenomena. And I wanted to do dance, so I wanted to make this kind of idea of a movement poetic essay. And I was working on that, and we would try to figure out ways to put it together. So I think one answer to your question is that having to be in the house together and do it in screen together threw us together in a way that we might not have been had we done this on stage. We were going to do it on stage as solos that intersected every once in a while, but I think we were much more integrated in that sense. And we didn't expect to have a third character in the play, and the house snuck up on us in that sense.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so the other question you asked was, did it change? So no, the text was kind of written. So we didn't change. My text wasn't written. Peggy's text had been written and edited, and it was ready to go. Mine wasn't. So some of mine I wrote along the way, but I wouldn't say that the text itself was influenced by the house. I think just our relation was.
Right.
And I like, sorry, because
no, Peggy, go.
We each had a room and a studio. I mean, the house had endless rooms, and the studio, the rooms were huge, as you see. I don't know if you can tell, but they were really big, empty rooms, like a studio. We never had a studio before. And lately we've been trying to get, this thing called, residencies are new for us. We always just, right. So we decided, let's do residencies. And then we started doing some residencies, and we thought of this as another residency and a space. We never really thought about time to make a piece. We usually make it in a month, and then it develops in front of an audience.
Right.
So it was quite luxurious. It only made sense that I ended up as a Zoomie instead of a performance.
That's a good term. I like that. Did you miss an audience? Did you miss that kind of live interactivity? And how did it feel sort of doing it in front of the computer with your amazing collaborators on the other end, but not with you?
Felt really intimate. And I feel like because we're so close to them now, and Vivian and Morgan, I felt like we were doing it. We were all performing at the same time. There was something so immediate about it, because now we'd just say, can you, there's a table that we had a table lamp and another lamp. Could you just move that a little bit over? And this, we were talking into Zoom anyway, and we had no one in this house for 5 months. It was just us. It's kind of scary. We've been living together now a year and a half, which is we've never done.
Well, we did in the beginning of our relationship 40 some years ago. And then after about 15 years, we decided we needed to live separately and still be together, still work together, whatever that means, the being together. But yeah, we haven't lived together this long for a long time. But, for me, performing for Zoom, I'm surprised to hear you say, because Peggy loves an audience, and you get disappointed if it's not a big audience. You like that interaction. I don't have that desire, but I do have a sense of responsibility for an audience. And I teach performance at Queen Mary, and one of the things I teach my students is about not reaching for the audience, not pleasing the audience, not taking care of the audience, but being really present and being non-performative in my performance. And I've never been able to do that because I was trained in the theater.
Right.
So that tendency to want to please the audience or make sure they're okay or make sure they're getting it or make sure Peggy's on the right spot or all of that comes into play on stage. It didn't when I was on Zoom. And I felt like I had the opportunity to just be much more authentic in myself on Zoom than I've ever been able to be. So I learned a lot about performance by not having an actual audience in the room.
That's really a good point, because I think this adjustment to Zoom and adjustment to the digital space has been very challenging for a lot of people. But in my reception of your piece, I just didn't feel that, which was kind of wonderful. And I think the way that you constantly challenge your audience, you think you kind of know what's happening, and then of course you totally do not know what's happening. That was such a wonderful relief, because I think a lot of the consumption of theater over this last year has been around trying to preserve the live experience through the digital sphere, which is just not possible, right? I think that was the lesson. It's just not possible. So do something different. And I think your fabulous breaking down of the fourth wall, whatever the fourth wall is in these little squares. And I mean, it was really quite extraordinary. And so how much of your editing of the piece happened in the moment and how much happened after the fact? Like, you could see what the footage is. I mean, the soundscape is extraordinary. Your use of text, across that amazing blank wall and other spaces, how much was happening live in that kind of process, and how much was a post kind of collaborative process after you had already recorded everything?
Well, we're really lucky in that our production manager is a bit of a...
And designer. She's also a designer.
Yeah, a bit of a genius. She's never done video or Zoom or anything before. And she edited it all.
Wow.
And she was basically, her and Vivian, our sound person, and Morgan, our movement person, were basically the editors.
Well, we edited it together.
Yeah.
I was involved in that process.
But I mean, everyone was involved in it.
And I think that's true throughout. I think the thing about you saying how much of it was live is that it was a real compositional process. Every time we came to the next scene, we knew we had the text. We had maybe ahead of time decided the room. We kind of knew where the piece was going. And then we all together sort of composed the image and composed the material within the thing. So I would say 75% of it was done. And then the editing was the other 25%, which was a similar kind of process where, now would edit some things. I would look at it, we would work on it together. Peggy would look at it. Viv would come in with the music would influence the editing, it would change. So it felt truly compositional, start to finish.
Besides, it felt really fun in a way that theater never felt like fun to me. Theater always felt like pressure and openings and all that stuff. And I loved it because there was I didn't have to memorize my line because I can't anymore.
That's brilliant.
And Lois gave me all the lines, and that echo and the sort of subtle story of Echo and Narcissus underneath.
That was wonderful. Yeah.
We got that echo through Lois giving me the lines. You could hear her in the other room giving me the lines through my headphones, because that's all we had for the lockdown. All we had was a Zoom, was the one. We had a computer. We had we had mistakenly brought two costumes, the yellow, you see the yellow. We had two props and Lois's yellow boots. And we had headphones from Queen Mary by mistake. So we were able to do it. We just had to use whatever we had.
I was just thinking about this. I feel a little bit like a weirdo. I mean, you ask about Zoom and the difficulties on transferring things to Zoom. I love it, actually. And Peggy's talking about how we had such a good time. I love, I've been talking about the Zoom frame as the sort of the proscenium arch of the 21st century. I mean, I think that we'll never go completely back. I think we'll always stay with this media integrated with the rest of our performance. Certainly we will. But I love teaching on Zoom. I've done my best teaching. I feel much more intimately connected to my students, and they've done the best work that I've seen in 20 years of teaching. So there's a part of me that, doesn't want to let go of this, and I won't let go of it, but I know that we're moving more away from it. But there was a lot of love in the process, and a lot of love with the materials, including the technology that we were using.
Yeah, the intimacy was so special, I have to say, partly because now we use headphones so much that I could hear you so well, right? I could hear you in here, and I felt the experience was much more intense than in the theater, because often in the theater, it's like you end up coming in late, you're in the back, there's 4 people in front of you, of course, there's the energy and the vibe of those people, but the actual relation to the performer, to me, felt so much more powerful than live theater, and which constantly surprises me, right? And also the other thing that I found so extraordinary is the accessibility, right? Now so many people can witness your work. All these wonderful Brown students who were all over the world, I think probably when they were watching this film, not being together in a class on campus, some of them may have been, but the fact that there was an accessibility to this performance, and it didn't require them to come to La Mama or to go to, the Barbican. There's something about reaching people in different ways now that I think is really, really special.
I'm very excited about that. You're right. We had people cut from countries who've never seen our work show up and on demand and watch it, when they wanted to. I was just thinking, as you were talking, when we first started working on the performance in London to make it live, we wanted to make it a relaxed performance. That was quite, in terms of accessibility, that kind of accessibility, we wanted to make sure it was a performance that felt comfortable for neurodivergent audiences and all kinds of audiences. And in a way, this is the most relaxed we could possibly have made it. Because you could be making your dinner and watch this if you want to. You can walk out of the room, or you can stop and start again. So I hadn't thought of that till you just mentioned it, the accessibility issue.
Also, there's another thing is the sound, because you have access to the sound right here. You're not, as a performer, you don't have to project and yell to the back, and you don't have to be on a microphone and all that stuff. A friend of mine, David Cale, I remember he was in a Woody Allen movie once, his first movie, and Woody Allen kept saying, "Why are you so loud? Could you please just be more intimate?" And he'd go, "No, I know that I need to be project and all that stuff." And he's going, "Yeah, but for film, you have to just be quiet and just speak normally." Well, he didn't believe him, so he kept projecting. And he said he wasn't in very many movies after that because he was really loud. So the feeling also of this kind of Zoom is a feeling that you're talking to somebody.
Yeah. You're
not just trying to reach some dark lit person in the back of an audience where you can't see anybody anyway. That imaginary thing that you make up when you're performing. It's just a new thing. It's really exciting to me. Besides, every time this movie shows, I don't have to do it.
Exactly.
I can have
Does
dinner
it for you.
and have a drink and go for a walk, and somebody's watching, and it's the same every time, and because I'm a reluctant performer. Lois has been pushing me on the stage for almost 50 years, and I'm a reluctant performer. And I have a lot of anxiety about it. And I just love Zoom. So anyway.
Yeah, no, that's actually quite a wonderful thing to say to other reluctant performers, right? That there's a kind of freedom in this process of recording and the way that you chose to record it that is quite liberating for people. It's funny because, I was a child actress like a long time ago, And I still have anxiety dreams about forgetting my lines and being on stage and I missed my cue. I still, like 40 plus years later, I still have anxiety dreams about that. There's something very, as you said earlier, Peggy, like pressurized, right, about live theater, and something magical too, because maybe you go in a direction that you wouldn't have otherwise. So, but I think what I love about this piece so much is that every time I watched it, I noticed different things, right? Because you layered it so beautifully, you know, sound layering, but visual layering. But maybe you could say just a little bit more about The Last Gasp. And I know, you know, in your interview for 100 Years, 100 Women, you spoke really beautifully about all the meanings of The Last Gasp. But maybe you could say a little bit about what those two words mean to you, mean to this project, mean to you in this moment. And yeah, where you are now, having some distance from the project a little bit in terms of those two words, which were really quite extraordinary when put together.
We didn't quite realize the relevance of the words last gasp because we called it last gasp because Lois didn't want me to call it lucky fucker.
Right?
So Lois came up with last gasp, and without realizing that last gasp describes I can't breathe. It describes police killing, smothering Black people all the time and shooting them. It describes my desire to not perform anymore. It describes COVID. I mean, it's a word that just came.
I mean, I think we originally trying to name this event where these two things would come together. And Peggy had been adamant that this was going to be her last show. So, and so that last gasp was really about aging for us to start with, that this might be our last gasp. But then at that point, we wanted to combine it with some thinking and meditations on climate disaster. Not that it was a piece about climate change, but that was a backdrop for us. So we felt those last gasps of the planet, last gasp of this political moment that we're in, the last gasp of our lives, our creative potentials, we just felt like we were kind of at the ends of things. And that's why it came to us. And then of course, as Peggy said, suddenly there was a whole other relevance to it around the ability to breathe, whether through police violence or viral, catastrophe. So yeah, so that's what it came from.
I feel like I'm old school and I like a lot of my old schoolness, but I think this also had to do with a lot of the things I'm encountering as we toured, hundreds of times in all these different cities. The lack of humor and the lack of, or the supposed knowledge of political correctness, which I felt really good and really bad at the same time. And I was suffering from it, and because I would continually being, oh, go away, don't talk anymore, you old white person, go, that kind of thing. And I saw Lois, because I've always based my music and everything on what I was raised with, which was Otis Redding and James Brown, Sam and Dave, everybody from Roxbury, which was near where I went to school in Boston. And Lois said, I really need to check that out a little bit in this climate. And I was just very resistant to that. And I said, okay. And that's where it all came from. Well, I'm going to try to find a white guy I like, but it's really hard. So I did remember Johnny Ray. And so I started looking for Johnny Ray because I had just gotten hearing aids also. And he wore a big white hearing aid, Johnny Ray. And but in digging into Johnny Ray, of course, Walking in the Rain, his big hit song, was written by a Black guy in jail. So there you go. At the truth of everything, when you dig in there, is all history, isn't it? Or a lack of history. So that was pretty interesting just to, that's a whole nother show, isn't it, about, but we couldn't help but, I don't know, it's not even a political correctness now. I feel like it's a reaction, and it's wonderful because all our friends in London are now leaving their big positions and giving to a person of color in so many institutions in London, aren't there? I don't know if America's doing that, but I know that so many things are changing that are not funny. I mean, things aren't funny. 600 kids,
That's not funny. Yeah.
it's not funny.
That's why we tried.
One kid is not funny.
That's why we tried to put the "that's not funny" sort of through line that Peggy's constantly saying, because we kept encountering this is because we've built a way of making work that uses humor to address serious issues, whatever they may be, whether it's economics during the Reagan era or menopause in, as a butch lesbian, or whatever the seriousness of our challenges of our life may or may be around us. We try to make it funny, and it's very hard to find the humor in this moment. So that was a really important part of it.
Well, we find the humor.
We find each other funny.
That helps. Especially when you're stuck together for 16 months.
We can still laugh at each other. That's good.
Or because of today, we're stuck on the same screen. Usually we're on separate screens. The screen is too small for both of us to occupy our personalities.
No, that's really wonderful. And I love that comes through in this piece, and of course in all your work. But the students are very interested in thinking about the line between the personal, the political, the theatrical. And I think a lot of their questions as they were working with Leon around this piece was about that line, and where is that line for you two, and how do you navigate that line, which I think is very evident in your work, of course, but I know they're curious to know about, as makers themselves, right? Like, how do you figure out where that line is, and when do you cross it? When do you say, okay, we better not go there, or when do you really have to go there? Do you have advice for them in their early stages of creating?
I don't have any advice ever do I anymore?
You have plenty of advice.
But the advice I would give is, we don't ever answer any questions. We just question everything. I don't think we had we've ever tried to answer anything. I think what happened was, even for the breakdown scene in the movie, there was a breakdown scene where we really did break up. And we just in our work, we've always decided when things happen, things go whatever wrong, to leave them in, because it's so much like life. And that was when we saw the Marriage Story, was that time? That fight that they had was we looked at each other and said, that's us fighting. So let's do that and let's act it. And we had, Lois couldn't give me the lines. So we had the lines written all over the wall. I kept looking at the wrong place, and we, we're kind of, we laugh a lot about acting, about when people try to act and how funny it is and how uninteresting it is to me anyway. And I had the words written on the garbage can out the window when I was standing at the window, everything like that. And then finally, when we were really going at it, trying to act, we just cracked up.
That was the best. I really love that part.
I mean,
I was watching it about 2 a.m. and cracking up. I had to wake up my family as I was laughing hysterically. It felt like it was needed too, you know.
We needed it. I spent 7 years working with Spider Woman Theater, and Peggy joined us at the end. And one of the things that I learned from Muriel and Miguel is letting the mistake live and letting the flaw through. Let the flaw flow through. And that comes from the Spider Woman Hopi Indian goddess mythology of allowing there to be a flaw in the design in order for the spirit to come and go. And that was a very important part of what we did with Spider Woman. And that's been a really important part of our aesthetic. Whatever the mistakes are okay, and you work through them and you find things through them. And I was thinking about that a little bit when we were talking about Zoom and live theater. I mean, we've always had this idea that film has to be perfect. There's something about the perfection of the frozen moment in film. But I think this moment in social media and the ways that especially the younger people use social media. And we've lost that necessity to be perfect on screen. And I think that came together at a moment for us that made it possible to feel like we could make this movie, because we're not movie makers and we're not perfectionists, but we were allowed to make it loose and let it be recorded at the same time. So that's some advice I would give, is to allow for the failures and allow for the mistakes and live through them and grow through them.
And realize how entertaining they are, because but don't try to make a mistake. I mean, once we started doing that years and years ago, we would see students like try to break through the fourth wall, and they would do it sort of, I don't know, obviously or something. And it was just so, because we started doing it long before. And when we were doing the Wow Cafe, there was one show where Holly Hughes, I don't know if you know Holly Hughes, she would kick down the door of Wow and come in and strangle me because I was a waiter. I was Johnny Christmas from New Jersey or something. And she was trying to strangle me, but she's not an actor either. And I said to her, I said, you know, every night when you come through that door, you almost kill me. Don't do that anymore, or I'm going to call the police. So the next night she came in and she gets very excited and she did the same thing. So I just stopped the show and I said, will someone in this room please call 911 because this woman is not an actor. And some Academy person wrote about 3 pages on breaking down the fourth wall and how, you know, how we planned this whole thing. And it was completely the freedom to just say,
actually needed to
somebody
breathe.
get rid of this woman because I've tried every night. So that feeling is something that we sort of obsessed with at Wow Cafe. Was that being yourself, and also with Hot Peaches. I was with Hot Peaches before Spider Woman, and the feeling that we're all so special, and we're everything about us is different and wonderful, and we need to build on that rather than trying to build from the outside in. And Lois and Spider Woman taught me it's that finding the inside out, going from the inside out. And once we were teaching in Brazil, we were brought to Brazil to teach, I think, to be the opposite of Augusto Boal, because he imposed his system on prisoners, and they wanted to see if our system worked, where we found whatever jewel was inside of people rather than telling them how to be. And it was pretty intense, wasn't it? I mean, I don't.
We were just just to follow up on that, is that they wanted to see what a feminist methodology would be like within the women's prison system, because the Boal system is very scenographic. You bring in a scene, you act out that scene, you try to find an alternative version of that scene. That's what that system was. And they wanted to look at a different system. And our system is much more, I think, maybe you call it portraiture, where you go in and you find the essence of the person, and you elaborate that, and you make a fantasy out of that, and you create from that place, that inside place that Peggy was talking about. But I was also thinking when Peggy was talking about questions and how we make work. I mean, at this stage, after having done it now for 40 some years, I feel like I think of our work as a kind of method for facing and life's challenges and answering life's questions. That every piece that we've made, we've gone into because there was something going on that we couldn't figure out. And we used the work to help us figure it out, rather than, as Peggy said, make the work because we think we know the answer to that issue.
Yeah, that questioning, I think, especially for young people, you know, exploring so much and living, right? Often it's hard to make art when you're young because you haven't really lived yet. You know, there's something about that being an ongoing student, you know, of human nature and experiences. What I love too about this piece is that I didn't actually want it to end. Like I wanted to live in the questioning, right? And also, and this is something some of the students brought up, is it was so great not knowing where you were going next, what the next episode or the next moment was going to be. And I think for some that was hard,
Yeah.
right? You know, the studying theater and the structure of what should be or is or could be theater, I think um, you just implode that wonderfully. And it's really interesting to kind of see some of the student feedback about trying to understand what your arc is, you know, in the piece, and trying to understand the characters and the structure, you know where I'm going with this. So I wonder about yeah, just about that kind of breaking of form. And do you feel, as you look back over your time of making, has that form and the breaking of form been on your mind, or are you just doing what you do? And you know, that question about form always comes up, right? And I'm a lover of the breaking of form at all times. But then you kind of have to acknowledge what the form is that you're breaking. So is that part of your practice, part of your thinking?
Well, I think because Lois was very knowledgeable in theater when we met, and I didn't know anything, and so I got very cynical, and and to me, theater was this, well, to Lois too, the privilege of the middle class white people, basically, and because we were queer, and we just didn't want to replicate that horrible thing. Because even when we started touring, every single theater across America is run by some old drunk white guy, heterosexual or a closet case, who molests children. I don't know. It's like we didn't like it. And Lois was, unfortunately, from Virginia and being ingrained in learning theater, was very in love with the process and the so we broke it down together. I guess we crashed into each other.
Yeah, and I mean, I came from a different perspective. I love theater. I still love theater. I love the conventions of theater, but I think I am not capable of telling one story, or capable of telling a story, or I don't think I've ever had an arc in my entire life, and that's about my capabilities, but I also think it's about my background of coming up in an oral history kind of environment in the rural South, where nobody ever told one story, and nobody ever got finished with one story before another story got started. And I think that I just didn't know how to do anything else. I mean, and so when we started making things, we started to just put as many stories, and you said layers. We've always worked with layers where more than one thing could be going on at one time. And we started early on starting to work with relations rather than with a climax or with an arc. That we wanted to see what would happen between women, or what we want to see what would happen between women and their environment, or what would happen between live and television, or So I don't think I know how to do anything else except play with the conventions and the materials that I love and put them together in a composition that feels satisfying. And I think that's where we started and how we started. And I think maybe Peggy's cynicism and my optimism probably did clash and create what we've now managed to call a method. Don't know.
Do you call it a method?
No. Well, Lois might.
I do, because unfortunately, not fortunately and unfortunately, I have a job in a university. So the word methodology comes up a lot. And every time I use it, because it's now in my vocabulary, Peggy cringes. So I do think we have a method, though, because
we have an aesthetic.
Yeah, but also in the early days, it did take us a year and a half to feel like we had a show that we were happy with. And we did. I used to say we went out, bought all the groceries, invited an audience to dinner, and met them at the doorstep when we got back from the grocery store. We hadn't finished the dinner yet, and we would finish the dinner in front of them. Now, I think it takes us a lot less time, and I think we can actually finish a piece in the time to present it in a way that we're happy about it. Whether it makes sense to everybody or not, I'm never sure of that. But yeah, I think we do. I think we've figured out a way. Yeah, we do have a method.
Well, I think also the your being able to be theatrical and learn your lines and do all that stuff. And me, I can't. Even before I lost my memory, I couldn't remember anything. I would always make a mistake, or I'd do the last monologue of a show in the middle. And like all of a sudden Lois would be staring at me like, what are you doing? That immediately breaks down the whole thing.
Sure does, yeah.
So, and also being queer, we had to find a new way to do things because we weren't included in anything except tragedies and deaths and suicides. So we had to make a new way of performing that gave images of love, or we even have a piece where we were making fun of marriage, anniversary waltz, when was, I don't know when we made it, in the 80s or something. And
in the 90s, in the early 90s.
We had a wedding. That was so funny. It was George Jones and Tammy Wynette, actually. Tammy Wynette. And we had so much fun making fun of marriage that we have never been able to accept the idea of marriage, because to us it's just owning somebody. You can go get a lawyer and get a piece of paper that says whatever you want to say.
I really like that you said the words, actually, that the students said, I don't know where they're going with this, because we put that line in the performance, because it was a line that Elaine May said about Mike Nichols, and suddenly we thought, yes, that's Peggy. Certainly, when she starts talking like just now, I had no idea where she was. And sometimes it's okay, and sometimes I'm not sure. And then in the shows, I feel like we set things up and we're not quite sure, or the audience isn't quite sure. So we try to use that line, probably the most consciously we've ever used it, to say, I never know where you're going, but when we get there, it's okay. And I think that's true of life. We don't really know where we're going, but when we get there, it can be okay for some of us, for those of us who are lucky fuckers, I guess.
There you go.
There we go.
Really was a great title. Well, also, I think the journey just keeps on going too, right? And so that's what's actually really magical, that it isn't, there's no end stop. And that's also kind of the wonderful irony of The Last Gasp, that it's kind of like your wonderful investigation of dying on stage. Like there's so many really bad ways to do that, right? And I just love that. I was having flashbacks of all kinds of experiences where you see people dying on stage, but then this, again, like you said earlier, that seriousness that's underneath that is really quite shocking, actually. But the way that you approach it just brought just so much joy. So thank you.
It's about death, but we're only pretending.
Right. Exactly.
And we don't really die in the end. So.
Right. Well, it's also like the over dramatized last deaths where they die like 25 times. Yes. And you're like, okay, really, are you dead yet? And then that kind of existential moments when you consider what's happening. Well, I think we're, sorry. No, Peggy, go.
In the movies, they have those cliffhangers, don't they? They leave it at the end so that they can make a sequel. So you
right.
Even Lupin. Have you watched Lupin? At the end, at the last thing, he it's always like you don't know where he's going to turn up next.
Right? Is he really dead?
Yeah, even Thelma and Louise, we don't know if they hit the bottom of the canyon, did we? So now they're making a musical. So there we have it.
They are. Oh no!
Oh my goodness. Well, I think you touched on this a little bit, and I do wonder, Peggy, you always talk about being old school, but kind of how do you take in the current climate around feminism? Of course, we've been thinking for a year and a lifetime about the right to vote, about the kind of really awful absences in that early time of the suffragette movement and so on. But thinking about feminism and the kind of, let's just say, the arc of feminism, and not even feminism, just thinking about gender inclusivity, new terms, new ways to wrestle with things that you've been wrestling with across your lives. What's your take on the current climate, the current way things are heading.
Well,
I'm
when
being very vague deliberately, obviously.
You said that very well. I was very impressed.
I'm glad it's being recorded. Because that was a pretty genius thing you just said. I think it has to do with my take on it. I use old school because that's what I'm always called in my block, you know, since I
Yeah.
lived in my block 40 years. And oh, here comes old school, you know, that kind of old queer thing. And also, you know, it's a working class thing. I was never fit to be a feminist. I called myself one, but I was never what they wanted me to be. And I always was too butch and I was too queer and and I just wanted to get away from them. I mean, I never got along with the feminist movement. I mean, we used to get tomatoes thrown at us in London. We got at the ICA, we'd get tomatoes thrown at us for doing.
You did, I didn't.
I did for this butch monologue. I mean, the word butch was not a popular word at that time, and feminist is something I claim as a concept. I don't really like being around too many of them, of us, or whatever it is. Anyway, I forget what I was talking about.
No, I think for me too, I never felt like, I mean, I always have a kind of academic aspiration.
Ooh, the lights come on.
Mm-hmm. And I always wanted to, I think I probably had I grown up in a different environment with a different family, not working class, more education, I might have become an academic. So I have that aspiration. And I think that happened to me when I encountered feminism. I felt deeply feminist as a kid because I grew up in a matriarchal environment, and I felt like I could do anything I wanted to do. And I felt everybody should have the right to do whatever they wanted to do and reach their full potential. That was my upbringing. But then when it came to feminism, I felt like I didn't have the right language. I didn't have the right intellect, an analysis or dialectical thesis to sort of be a proper feminist. So I think both Peggy and I have come to feminism from this experiential place and a class place. And so our class response to it has been slightly skeptical, not necessarily cynical, but skeptical. And so, and you know, I had feminists in the early days of Spider-Woman because I was wearing a push-up bra and a blonde wig in 1970, who literally, this feminist pushed me against the wall and said, didn't I realize I was titillating the men in the audience? And, you know, and this was glam feminism. So we've all had that response, and yet I feel deeply feminist. I feel like I am absolutely feminist. That's the first way I would identify myself. And I think that the current climate, as you described it so greatly, is around language. It's around terminology. It's around labeling, which I think is really important, because it was important to me when I labeled myself as a lesbian femme. That was really important to me. And I understand it, and I understand the need for it, but I think it's getting in our way. I think the terminologies are getting in our way, because I think there's a lot of us who have a lot more in common than we think. And I think, and I think that we are more allies than we think we are amongst the gender community. I think I'm talking about primarily.
I think it's
we're all together. Don't say it's NYU.
I think it's NYU graduate school. All those intellectuals made up all these words and destroyed everything. And divided everybody, and because they think they're so smart, all the young ones. But now there's a generation which is past that generation, where they thought they were discovering the world and gender. And now it's different, because we have a neighbor who's suddenly, that kid has grown their hair long. He's like country. And he said he's a soft boy. He's a soft boy.
And I have a niece, in Southwest Virginia, in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia, who's identifying as gender non-binary. So, I mean, it is changing, and it's changing. And I think we're all getting more comfortable with the pronouns. I mean, it takes a while. I suspect it's the language that's the problem, but impatience is a problem. And we all understand impatience. We've all been on that side of it, and want it to change for our benefit and everyone's benefit now. And sometimes it can't change now, but it's changing. So I'm optimistic.
Well, that's a wonderful note to maybe pause on. I know we could just keep on talking all day and through the week and into next week. And I
We
hope
want to
we'll,
ask you questions.
Yeah. So we turn around and interview you.
sure, I'd love that.
We'll set it up.
Okay, that would be wonderful. Yeah, so let's continue. And I know just on behalf of Leon and his class and everyone watching, we're just so grateful for your time and that the lights are back on. I heard Peggy say the lights might be back on. So a nice moment to just pause and end our time for now, right? To be continued. But thank you for this piece. And of course, your lifetime of work. It's always been an inspiration and just a joy to have some time with you this morning. And so we'll wrap for now and keep the conversation going.
Well, thank you very
Thank
much.
you. It was
Thank you for
really-
your lovely questions and your presence and for this invitation. Really, we've had a nice time. Thank you.